More complicated note, let's talk about Diddy. I know that you believe he has definitely abused women in relationships, but you have an issue with the government's actions against him, and you have issues with the media's overall portrayal of Diddy. You think the government is overreaching, and you hate all of this, what you call quote-unquote RICO bullshit and how it's misused. You think the Fed cases have outrageous tactics and sentences, and the media has done a terrible job covering the Diddy case, and people have lost their minds to what you call overblown fantasies. Very interesting. Elaborate your thoughts on the Diddy of it all.
Yeah, so for a long time, I've been reluctant to talk about this because the fact that I have covered so many Me Too cases, I have gotten this reputation for being someone who just defends everyone, which is so not the case. And I think that it's probably 50-50 in most cases where there are allegations of this sort. Probably half the time I think they're guilty, half the time innocent. But I have to tread carefully. I've had to tread carefully up to this point, but I really have with Diddy, with the Sean Combs. I'm just going to call him Sean Combs because I feel ridiculous saying Diddy. In my generation, it was Puff Daddy, by the way, and he was on top for a long time. But I do want to talk about this because I have been increasingly alarmed at certain trends that you've mentioned here. So first of all, I have had pre-existing issues with RICO or racketeering laws for a long time before this case, because the thing is, these types of laws and strategies, legal strategies, were originally intended to take down like only the worst organized crime figures. They were, as you know, they were developed to go after the mafia. And what has happened, particularly in recent years, is that those laws have been basically, in a way, the implementation of those laws has expanded now like an umbrella to cover a lot of activities and behaviors that they were not originally intended to cover. So in Diddy's case, I understand that everybody has seen that video of him beating his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. And there's no way to excuse that, nor would I want to. And I think that he has had probably serious longstanding issues with women of domestic, we're talking about domestic violence of that nature. And he probably deserves some time in prison to think about it. How much time? I don't know. But here's the problem. The government is not pursuing him for domestic violence. The government is pursuing him to the tune of decades in prison, primarily because he was running a prostitution operation. And by the way, it was a prostitution operation for him. So he wasn't, it was to the benefit of one man. So, he's not even out there like a normal hustler or madam or what have you, ensnaring the public, if you want to put it that way, in these vices. This is basically, he's into, escorts and kinky sex and all of that. And he set up a way of procuring escorts for himself. Now, that's where the racketeering charge comes in, because the government, to demonstrate that there's racketeering or to pursue a RICO charge, has to show a group of people were involved in an illegal business of some kind. And so prostitution, it is illegal. Now, I personally don't think that it should be illegal. I don't think it's probably healthy in general for people to engage in that, but I'm very libertarian, and I think it should be legal. But prostitution and also bringing people in from across state lines, that gets you in a lot of trouble. But he is facing really the rest of his life in prison primarily for that. So it's not domestic violence. They're not pursuing him for domestic violence. They're pursuing him for the prostitution, racketeering, and drugs. Because also it seems like Sean Combs enjoyed doing a lot of drugs, which again, I don't think should be illegal. And he also, it seems, had a pretty sophisticated way of getting those drugs and of having them available. And of course, people they love to salivate over these details, like, oh, his servants had to wear fanny packs with pink cocaine in them. Okay, well, if that's the way a man wants to live, great. I really don't care. I really don't care as long as it's consensual. So here's where it gets sticky, Brett, is that embedded in the government's report, this filing that explains why they're going after Sean Combs, it accuses Sean Combs not only of this racketeering and prostitution and sex trafficking and all that, but also of coercion through financial means and coercion through violence. In other words, there are people who are claiming now that they were not there as escorts consensually, or women who engaged in sex for money or whatever, who are claiming, well, I was pressured in some way, or in some cases claiming that they were actually like physically assaulted or pressured into doing things, right? So to me, this is the issue. I am only interested in whether behavior was consensual or non-consensual. I don't think that we should be prosecuting sex trafficking if someone is, we're talking about consensual escort activity, prostitution. I don't think that we should be prosecuting drug offenses of this nature, particularly as he wasn't trying to bring it out into the community or sell it on the street. It was, again, just for him. He basically, as a really wealthy, powerful celebrity and music executive who was worth like $1 billion, he was able to create the kind of lifestyle that he wanted, which was a lot of sex and a lot of drugs, apparently, right? Well, which we used to celebrate, right or wrong, in the 90s with all this. Yeah, the gangster culture, until kind of like with other cases I've talked about, we just suddenly decided that this is now not only taboo, but illegal. And so people might say, well, but what if there was coercion? What if there was violence? Well, this is what has to be proved in court, because so far, the allegations of financial coercion, to me, they seem like bullshit, because I thought that prostitution was, by its very nature, by its very definition, a financial transaction. I'm paying you money, and then you're going to have sex with me, or you're going to have sex with someone else in front of me. So these women now are claiming that they grew to depend on his money so much that they couldn't leave. They couldn't say no because they were financially coerced. They were in a financial bind. Well, that's just poor decision making on their part. That's not. That's, you know, so to me, I have a big problem with that. And then also, when you look more deeply into some of these allegations of violence and stuff, some of it is suspect. Like, oh, he threw something at the wall and it scared me, or whatever, right? So I'm not saying that this man is not capable of violence or that he's a good guy. We've all seen the video of him beating up the ex-girlfriend. What I am saying, though, is that I think that a number of these charges by the government and the sentences, the decades-long sentences that they are pursuing here, I don't think that it's right. And we may not care about, or I think that potentially it could be an overreach. What happens if there's a celebrity that we do like, or a person that we do like, who is also a fan of prostitutes or drugs, and who maybe, hires a bunch of prostitutes, spends a lot of money on escorts or hookers or drugs or what have you? Are we now going to say that that person is guilty of RICO crimes and needs to spend decades in prison? And so that's my concern. I'm also, as you said, concerned about the sensationalized narrative that has developed in the media around Sean Combs, P. Diddy, because it has become really just a free-for-all of like every nutty accusation getting significant airplay, and also people taking things that I see as pretty innocuous and blowing them out of proportion. Now we have all of his salivating discussions of the celebrity white parties. Ooh, which celebrities went to these white parties? Like, we're talking about Eyes Wide Shut and someone's going to be murdered at the end. No, you know what the dirty secret about these white parties are, from what I've heard, is how often boring they were. This is what people don't understand, who have this view of Hollywood as like this dark world of like the most seedy, unseemly, horrible things you can imagine. Yes, there are always going to be some despicable freak shows who are doing stuff like that, but most of the time it's bored people with a lot of money trying to make their lives a little less boring. And those white parties mostly were just celebrities going in there and drinking and then maybe hooking up at the parties, but now we have consensual sex at Diddy's parties, or now at Sean Combs' parties. That's now being recast as something nefarious. And so I'm afraid that there's almost a kind of a moral sexual panic that's building up sort of in tandem with this narrative around Sean Combs, where we're just going to see, provocative sexual activity, or someone who uses a lot of drugs as now being a threat to society. We've got to RICO him and we've got to put him behind bars for 20 years. And so what I would ask people about the Sean Combs situation is, do you think that a man should spend the rest of his life in federal prison for liking prostitutes and drugs a lot? Because I'm afraid that's what this is going to come down to. But I could be wrong. I'm going to go to the trial in May. I want to be there to actually be in court every day to hear what is alleged and to see the testimony. And it may be that I come out of that and I say, no, it turns out, this guy was taping these celebrities who didn't know it without, having sex without their knowledge. He was drugging people, et cetera, without their knowledge. And so he's a bad guy. But I do feel like we haven't gotten that yet, and there's a really sensationalized narrative out here. I don't like what's being said about Justin Bieber. You've got all of these people on the internet who just assume and are pontificating about the fact that Justin Bieber was sexually assaulted by Sean Combs. There's absolutely no evidence of that. They point to this one MTV clip, a kind of an awkward interview. Those things are always awkward anyway. And they say, oh, look, you can see he's kind of scared. And what good does it do Justin Bieber to have this label of sexual assault victim out there put on him against his will? He's never accused him of anything. Now people are talking about Leonardo DiCaprio because apparently he had some secret parties with Diddy. So I would just say that I think that there may be some there here. Where there's smoke, there may be some fire, but there's a hell of a lot of smoke getting in the way on this, and it bothers me.
I know when I was at the height of making money and the height of my power, I certainly aspired to be P. Diddy, but only on like a $450,000 a year budget.